Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here in June. I'm very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. Hello, and welcome back to Big Mouth, and you can keep this or any other conversation I ignite going over at my Twitter, at Movies TV Mad, my Vero, at Big Mouth 1, and the extension of this channel, give or take the oddball video, is my Instagram, Big Mouth. And yes, welcome to Big Mouth. And I'm going to do something I don't normally do here. Normally I talk about the DCEU TV shows, other movies, trailer reactions. But today we are going to react to the UK general election result. Boris Johnson has won by a landslide. And some people will be happy. People like me are unhappy because I'm going to be honest. I voted for Jeremy Corbyn. Now I'm going to be clear here. Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister scared the shit out of me nearly as much as Boris Johnson being Prime Minister, which is a reality now. Look, we had two very, very shitty options, and people decided to choose one shitty option against the other. But I think we need to backtrack and go back to the moment that David Cameron was elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I believe it was always the Tories' plan from the moment they got in to ignite this Brexit debacle. So, you know, there's always been this discussion for the past 20, 30 years. Should the UK remain in the EU or not? It's a kind of conversation you had at Prime Minister's Question Time, a question you never took seriously. It's something that we debated down the pub. Again, we never thought it would happen. But the Tories were planning this from the very, very beginning. And I think that David Cameron was part of that plan. Now, he was promising, after he got in the first time, when he wanted to get in from a majority, a referendum on the EU status of the United Kingdom. Now, I never believed he would actually ignite a referendum, but he did. Now, he promised it, obviously, to get his majority so he wouldn't need the Liberals anymore. It worked, but nobody thought a Tory would actually keep their promise. And this is where I think this was a plan from the very beginning, to get a referendum. Now, nobody could really know which way this was going to go, but the moment, obviously, the referendum went the way of leave and not remain, he said he was leaving. Again, I think that's all part of the plan. And Boris Johnson was there, being groomed to be Prime Minister for a very, very long time. So then Theresa May came in. Now, she was saying things like Brexit is Brexit, but it was very clear from the beginning that Theresa May was on the Remain side of the argument, but she was pretending that she was going to, let democracy be done. But in the background, she was fucking up the negotiations on purpose so it would never happen. So Boris Johnson and the far-right Tories had to make sure they got rid of her. They did get rid of her. From the moment she messed up her own general election, and Jeremy Corbyn did so well then to whittle down their majority, there was a problem. She had no power anymore. They drove her out. Boris Johnson came in, and he had no majority, and he was losing more and more support, wasn't he? So any sensible person would say, you know what, this is great. The Tories have got no power. Let's carry on like this till we can create a situation where we can convince the public that Brexit is a whole shower of shit. But what happened was Jeremy Corbyn's hubris made him have ambitions to be Prime Minister. Now, any Labour leader should have ambitions of being Prime Minister, but at the end of the day, this was never going to happen. There was rumours of anti-Semitism from the Labour Party, from Corbyn, Labour Jews, quitting the Labour Party. Now, mainly, this was an illusion. Corbyn isn't an anti-Semitist, but he doesn't support Israel's incursion of Palestine. So from that, the media were able to kind of stir this kind of agenda, this narrative that he was anti-Semitic. Of course, we all know this is not true, but we all know something. It's very few times where we've had a Labour government in the history of the United Kingdom. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why Boris Johnson got in with a majority, because the UK is primarily a right-wing country. It is. And that's why the referendum to leave the EU won and remain lost. But once that referendum result happened, there was a big problem, because how do you go back on democracy? It's very, very, very difficult. And so in this general election, and once Corbyn agreed to the general election, it was over. Why do you think Johnson was fighting so hard for a general election? He knew what was going to happen. He knows he lives in a primarily right-wing country, right? Excuse me. God, that frog in my throat. Get rid of it. But yeah, so he knew that he needed a general election. He knew he was never going to be able to be a prime minister with power in a situation that they were in, because everything they tried to do was voted down by the Liberals, by Labour, and everyone else. So then you've got the Liberals who say if they get in, they're going to reverse Article 50. Well, no one's going to vote for her, and the reason nobody voted for her is because they knew who and what she is. She's an extreme leftist. She's very dangerous, and there's something else. She didn't stand for anything. She just used to talk about platitudes, about being a feminist, and she was part of the Tory Liberal partnership that was part of doing terrible things to working class people. So nobody trusted her. And also, another problem with her was she was bringing in ex-moderate Tories. So this was becoming, like we used to have New Labour, the Liberal Party became New Tories. So she was never going to get in. So, you know, if you're on the moderate left, your only hope was Jeremy Corbyn. And as I say, even though I voted for him, he wasn't exactly a great solution. In fact, he's just as dangerous as Boris Johnson, because he's an extremist. He's an extremist, and so is Boris Johnson. So now you've got the situation now where Boris Johnson obviously got a majority. It's not a shock to me. It's a shock to a lot of people. But as I say, the UK is a right-wing country, and it always has done. I grew up in an era of Thatcher getting in a first, second and a third term, right? There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. So now Johnson is talking about getting Brexit done, right? He can never get Brexit done, even with his majority. So now he's going to be discussing, look, Brexit is like war. Nobody wants it, but they want to keep the threat alive because you can buy and sell weapons and make a profit. Brexit's a great distraction. And even though he's got in with a majority, he's going to try and start the process on the 31st of January. But that's just the beginning. He's going to be negotiating with the EU for years to come. So the reality is Brexit still won't happen. But this is the thing. How patient will the public be with him? But there's another problem. Boris Johnson can't survive 5 years as Prime Minister. He's got too many skeletons in his cupboard. He's not bright enough. Look, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm no Tory. I hate the Tories. But I would have been quite happy with any other moderate Tory leader getting a majority. Even David Cameron, who was a moderate Tory. But you're looking at Boris Johnson. Now, Boris Johnson's like Donald Trump. He's not really far right. He really doesn't believe in anything. He just wants a legacy. He just wants to be Prime Minister. But it's crazy that this circus freak, this circus clown, has been voted for. And it just shows you how dumb people are. But this has always been the case in the UK. The UK public are very kind of subservient to the UK press. And as I said before, the only reason Tony Blair got in is because the Access media were okay with it. Now let's look at the media's role in this general election. All they were doing was boring on about Jeremy Corbyn being a socialist, being an anti-Semite. They were pushing it, and they were never going to allow him to be Prime Minister. Not because he's anti-Semitic, because he's a socialist and he was going to do some dramatic things. Now, the truth is, Jeremy Corbyn couldn't deliver on half the things he promised. It was literally impossible. He was just saying anything to get in. I mean, even before 10 o'clock UK time, when we were going to get the exit polls, he was on Twitter, vote Labour, vote Labour, vote Labour, vote Labour. That kind of smelt like an atmosphere of desperation, because even he knew it was impossible for him to get in. But he tried. Look, Jeremy Corbyn is a warrior. There's no question about it. He had 2 challenges on his leadership and he won them. That should never have been the case. But then we go back to see what's happened to Labour. And what's happened to Labour is simple. From the moment Tony Blair left, there was no one there. You have Gordon Brown, one of the best chancellors we have ever had, but he didn't have the personality to win a general election. And let's be honest about it, David Cameron was young, he spoke a good game, but it was just words, like all politicians, but he didn't get in with enough votes. So he partnered up with the Liberals, and that was the beginning of this plan, because he didn't want to be partnered in a further election with them. And what happened was he promised a right-wing country a referendum on Europe. You see, Leavers are the situation with Leavers is that they imagine this utopia of the good old days of the British Empire, taking back control. The question is, what are you taking back control of? You have no industry. That's nothing to do with the EU. You pissed everything you owned and made down the toilet. So when you talk about, having a deal, having all these deals with these different countries, but what are you actually going to sell these countries? What are you going to do a deal on? So ultimately, the only trade deal you're going to have is with America. Now, America, England is America's bitch already, right? So, but the problem with the Brexit thing as well was that not everyone voted to leave. The Scottish situation is a big problem now. And now that Nicola Sturgeon's, the SNP, won by such a big margin, they can have another vote on independence. Now, they already had a vote on independence, and obviously they decided to remain. But that was before Brexit. So it's going to be very interesting it's going to happen. It's going to happen. She has such a majority, she can force it through. So there's going to be another referendum. Referendums cost governments millions of pounds. This is the problem. And I suppose this was another problem with having another referendum for Brexit as well. But I agreed with it to a point of having another referendum with the deal that's been put in front of the British public. Do they agree? Because nobody knew what Brexit means. People still don't understand what Brexit means. Johnson's deal is terrible unless you're wealthy. And if you're wealthy, it's okay. It doesn't matter. So if we go back to Access Media, we look at the behaviour of someone like Piers Morgan, who is a Conservative, who voted for Conservatives. I mean, with a name like Piers, he's not working class, is he? What, Piers? You're going to go down the Legion with the lads? Piers has always been a Conservative. Now, he claimed when he was working with the Daily Mirror that he was a Labourite. But we all lie on our job interviews, don't we, Piers, to get the job? And we know what happened at the Mirror. He was finished. But then Tory voting Simon Cowell, his friend, got him a very, very big job on Britain's Got Talent. And then ultimately, he became very big on Good Morning Britain. And all we see him on Good Morning Britain is pushing the Conservative narrative. So, and people listen to him as well. There's a lot of people who are influenced by Piers Morgan. So he's not a particularly nice man. We knew what he got up to at the Mirror, and we know where he stands on this thing. So the result we got last night, I suppose the only surprise is kind of the hugely significant majority that Johnson got. It's Labour voters voting Conservative. Basically, the only thing this election was ever about was Brexit. And we were led to believe that more people were changing their minds and more people wanted to remain and leave. This is not true. I'll repeat again. this is a very, very right-wing country. They want to leave the EU because they think something amazing is going to happen once that happens. Of course it won't. Of course it won't. And now we have a very dangerous man. He may seem like a joke, and he is a joke. I mean, he's going to be representing the UK, negotiating with other people, meeting presidents, kings, princes. The man's an embarrassment. The man's an embarrassment. Now, I've just heard that they've decided to impeach Donald Trump. That's very good news. The sooner they can get rid of him as American president, the better. The less of a threat that Boris Johnson will be. But Boris Johnson will not last 5 years. He's won, but at the end of the day, it's only a matter of time till he'll have to resign. The future of the country is this, that Labour need a young, moderate, vibrant leader, and they need it now. Now, I don't know if they've got someone like that, and I mean, he hasn't even decided to resign yet. He said he's not going to fight another general election, but he hasn't officially stepped down yet, Jeremy Corbyn. He has to go. He is killing the Labour Party, and he has been killing the Labour Party. He's stubborn. The socialists put him in. The unions put him in. They're keeping him in, but they are nothing now. They have nothing. So he has to go. They need a moderate leader, a good leader, where people of the country listen to and pressure Boris Johnson, find the skeletons in that closet. So ultimately, because he's going to be making mistakes and things are going to come out about his past, he cannot carry on as leader indefinitely. He may get 6 months, he may get a year, he may get a year and a half or 2 years. I don't know. He won't make the 5 years. It's important now to unseat him as quickly as possible, unless you voted for him and you're happy that he's there. But listen, it's a flawed system. Another problem is this tactical voting. This tactical voting where in some areas people were influenced by actors like Hugh Grant to vote Liberal in certain areas because that means that Labour would get in, is a myth. And that's one of the reasons Johnson won, because people got confused. But ultimately, it was leave the EU or remain in the EU, and the UK categorically decided via a general election to leave the EU. So the process is going to begin. There's no question about that. If the idiot that is Jeremy Corbyn didn't agree to a general election, we would have had the Tories, and it would have had to have been a waiting game. But now, it's all different. The atmosphere, the environment has changed, because it's not just about Brexit, it's the other things this guy, this scuzzball's going to do to the country. It is what it is. But it is important that Trump is removed as president as soon as possible. Now, I've been honest about who I voted for. I've always been Labour. My dad's been Labour, so that's who we voted for. But Corbyn, look, I'll be honest, Corbyn wasn't the answer, and that's why he lost the election. There was just too many things going against him. And one of the main things was Access Media. You see someone like Laura Kreuzberg as well from the BBC, or Kreuzberg, or however you pronounce her name. I said on Twitter today that she deserves to be Prime Minister more than Boris, because after all, she worked really hard for it, didn't she? So there's a lot of corrupt forces responsible for this, but ultimately, the people of the United Kingdom have voted to leave the EU. In a way, it should happen just to teach people a lesson, because even you people who voted for Boris Johnson, you didn't vote for Boris, you didn't vote for Boris, you voted for Brexit. And now you're going to see the consequences. You don't believe it. You think we're just being salty and we've got sour grapes, but you are going to see everything unravel. And ultimately, I'm happy this has happened now. And you know why? Because by the time Boris is finished with the United Kingdom, by the time Boris Johnson is finished with you lot, you are going to be begging for a Labour government. And a Labour government with a majority in 5 years' time is what you're going to get. But you're going to go through a hell of a lot of pain just because you voted for Mr. Blobby, the Conservatives, and Brexit. Brexit is a fascist pipe dream. You're never going to get there. Never. Live with that.